Marissa had always believed she knew her husband, David, completely. Every habit, every plan, every secret of the man she loved. But the moment she stepped back into the home they had built together, a creeping unease took hold. The garden was overgrown, the mailbox stuffed with unopened letters, and the air inside was heavy with silence. David's belongings were gone, yet no sign of struggle remained. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the echo of a life Marissa thought she shared. The questions clawed at her relentlessly. Where had he gone? Why had he disappeared? And could the life she had built with him have been nothing more? Marissa returned to the house she had helped design after months away, expecting relief and familiarity, but instead she felt an unease that settled deep in her chest. Even before unlocking the door, the place looked neglected. The lawn had grown wild, weeds pressing against the walkway, and the paint on the porch railing was chipped. The porch light, which her husband always fixed immediately when it flickered, hung broken and dark. The mailbox was overflowing with unopened letters, some bent and faded by the sun. This was not how he lived. He was precise, orderly, and deeply protective of the home they built together. As she stepped inside, the silence felt heavy and unnatural. The air was stale, carrying a faint smell of dust and disuse. The furniture stood exactly where it had been months ago, untouched as though time had paused. There were no signs of chaos or struggle. The walls were clean, the floors clear, and nothing appeared broken. Yet something was missing. She noticed the absence slowly in pieces. His shoes were gone from the entryway. The coat he always kept by the door was missing. The familiar hum of his presence, something she had never questioned before, was completely absent. She moved through each room carefully, noticing details that unsettled her more with every step. The kitchen clock had stopped on a random hour. The calendar on the wall ended abruptly weeks earlier. In the bedroom, his side of the closet was empty, hangers swaying slightly as if recently disturbed. His phone charger lay unplugged on the nightstand, but his phone was nowhere to be found. Panic crept in quietly. He had not left in a hurry, yet he had not stayed. By the time she reached the living room again, the truth pressed down on her with terrifying clarity. Her husband had vanished without warning, without explanation, and without leaving a single trace behind. As the hours passed, Marissa forced herself to stay focused, believing that careful observation might reveal what panic could not. She began to examine the house more closely, no longer as a home, but as a space filled with unanswered questions. Every room carried the same unsettling stillness, as if it had been sealed off from the outside world. She opened drawers and cabinets that she had never thought to question before. Many were neatly arranged, but some felt oddly incomplete, as though items had been removed with intention rather than haste. In the kitchen, she noticed the calendar more carefully. Several days were crossed out with firm lines, stopping suddenly at a date that meant nothing to her. No notes followed, no reminders, no plans for the future. The garage revealed even more confusion. Tools were missing from the wall where they had always hung, leaving clean outlines behind. The shelves were almost empty, except for a single old toolbox coated in dust. It looked forgotten, yet deliberately left behind. The home office unsettled her the most. The desk was cleared of personal items, and the computer was gone. Inside a filing cabinet, she found folders filled with old receipts and contracts that no longer mattered. Behind them, carefully hidden, were rolled sheets of paper that did not belong there. When she unrolled them, her hands began to shake. They were architectural drawings, but not one she recognized. The measurements showed space beneath the house, deep and narrow, extending far beyond the original foundation plan she had approved. Confusion turned into dread. She knew every detail of this house. There should have been no hidden levels, no secret rooms. The realization that something existed beneath her feet without her knowledge made the walls feel closer, heavier. Whatever her husband had been planning, it had started long before he disappeared, and the house itself was part of the secret. The next morning, Marissa contacted the authorities, hoping that official involvement would bring clarity and reassurance. Instead, the process deepened her fear. The initial response was calm and procedural, focused on timelines and basic facts. Because there were no signs of forced entry or violence, the disappearance was treated as a missing adult case rather than an emergency. Marissa struggled with that conclusion, knowing her husband's habits and routines too well to believe he would leave without notice. Still, the house offered no obvious proof to support her instincts. Investigators began by reviewing his recent activity. His phone records showed no outgoing calls after a certain date, and his device had not connected to any network since then. Credit card use ended abruptly, as if he had stepped out of the digital world entirely. At first, this suggested a deliberate choice. Then more unsettling details emerged. Bank statements revealed repeated cash withdrawals made over several months, always in modest amounts that avoided attention. A second account surfaced under a business name Marissa did not recognize. She realized she had never seen any paperwork connected to it. As authorities dug deeper, they discovered her husband had resigned from his job weeks before Marissa returned, yet no one had informed her. His co-workers described him as focused but distant in his final days. Email records showed messages sent through encrypted platforms, their contents unreadable and their recipients unknown. These were not the actions of a man leaving impulsively. They reflected careful preparation. With each finding, the image of her marriage shifted. The man she loved had been living a parallel life, one she had never been invited into. Investigators stopped asking when he would return. They began asking what he might have been running from, and whether his disappearance was the beginning of something far darker. Unable to shake the feeling that the house itself was hiding answers, Marissa began searching areas she had long ignored. The basement had always been little more than a storage space, unfinished and rarely used. As she sorted through boxes and old furniture, she noticed how quiet it felt, the air cooler and heavier than the rest of the house. When she stepped near the back wall, the sound beneath her feet changed. The concrete no longer echoed solidly. It carried a hollow tone that made her stop. She pressed her palm against the wall and followed it slowly, tapping as she moved. One section sounded different, almost thin. After clearing away stacked crates, she discovered a faint outline where the concrete seams did not align with the rest of the foundation. It took effort to pry the panel open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The steps were steep and poorly lit, clearly not part of the original design. Fear and curiosity battled as she made her way down. At the bottom was a small enclosed room, barely tall enough to stand in comfortably. The smell of damp air and dust filled her lungs. Metal shelves lined the walls, holding sealed plastic crates and old electronic equipment coated in grime. A single bulb flickered weakly overhead. Inside the crates were stacks of documents, many of them photocopies of identification cards bearing her husband's face but different names and dates. Passports, driver's licenses, and official stamps suggested careful forgery. Maps were pinned to the wall, marked with circles, arrows, and handwritten symbols. Some locations were crossed out, others highlighted. Nothing explained their meaning, but together they formed a pattern of movement. This room was not built for storage or safety. It was designed for secrecy. Standing there, Marissa understood that her husband's disappearance was not sudden. It was the final step in a plan that had been hidden beneath her home all along. Once the hidden room was discovered, the investigation changed direction completely. Authorities no longer viewed the disappearance as a personal matter, but as part of something wider and far more serious. The documents and forged identifications were cataloged and traced, revealing links to unresolved financial crimes in several regions. Shell companies, false addresses, and abandoned offices began to surface, all connected by the same pattern of movement found on the maps beneath the house. Marissa watched as the life she thought she knew unraveled into something unfamiliar and deeply disturbing. Further analysis showed that her husband had been using multiple identities long before their marriage. Records indicated name changes, temporary residences, and carefully timed relocations that avoided detection. The house was no longer seen as a place of comfort, but as a carefully chosen base, positioned for privacy and control. Its design allowed for concealment, isolation, and quick exits. Marissa struggled to accept that the home she had lovingly planned had been used as a tool of deception. As investigators reconstructed his past, they uncovered a trail of financial manipulation involving investors who had lost large sums of money. Each case had stalled due to a lack of evidence or the sudden disappearance of key figures. Her husband's fingerprints appeared just long enough to cause damage, then vanished again under another name. The realization left Marissa numb. She questioned every memory, every promise, and every moment of trust. What haunted her most was the precision of it all. Nothing about his disappearance suggested fear or desperation. It reflected control. He had prepared for exposure long before it arrived. The man she married had not been hiding from danger. He had been waiting for the right moment to erase himself, leaving behind a life designed to. As weeks passed, forensic teams returned to the house with renewed determination. What had once seemed like a quiet disappearance now suggested careful planning and deliberate concealment. The yard, which Marissa had assumed was simply overgrown, revealed signs of disturbance near the foundation. Soil had been moved, leveled, and compacted in ways that were difficult to notice without close inspection. The investigators dug carefully, uncovering fragments of burned documents and melted plastic, remnants of efforts to erase evidence. Electronic drives were charred, but partially recoverable, their contents hinting at the extent of her husband's secret activities. The evidence suggested that the disappearance had not been as voluntary as initially believed. Someone with knowledge of his plans may have intervened, or he may have been forced to execute his escape more quickly than intended. The house, once a sanctuary, had been converted into a stage for deception. The hidden basement, the maps, and the fake IDs were not just preparations. They were part of a decoy. Whoever had been involved in these plans anticipated close scrutiny and had left behind enough to mislead investigators while maintaining control of the situation. For Marissa, the discovery was devastating. She felt like an outsider in her own life, as though the man she had married had been playing a role all along. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper secrets. Every object carried the weight of planning and concealment. She became hyper-aware of what had been left behind and what might still be missing. The realization was suffocating. Her husband's disappearance was both a personal betrayal and a criminal puzzle, one that had been engineered to leave almost no trace. Authorities began to consider new possibilities, balancing between foul play and deliberate evasion. Marissa, meanwhile, was caught in a limbo of grief and suspicion. Her husband was gone, but the evidence he left behind suggested. Months passed with no sign of her husband, and Marissa began to feel the heavy weight of uncertainty pressing down on every part of her life. Then, late one afternoon, the investigators contacted her with unexpected news. Surveillance footage had surfaced from a coastal border town hundreds of miles away. The grainy video showed a man who resembled her husband, walking through a busy terminal with a confident, measured pace. He carried a small bag and appeared calm, scanning his surroundings as though he had done this many times before. The timestamp placed the footage just days after the soil disturbances and hidden room discoveries at her house. For Marissa, the revelation was a shock. The man she had feared was missing, perhaps harmed, had not only survived but seemed to have executed a plan with flawless precision. Authorities confirmed that he was using a forged passport under a completely different name. The discovery immediately shifted the narrative. His disappearance was no longer a mystery of potential foul play. It was evidence of a carefully orchestrated escape. Every step, every hidden document, every empty drawer in her house had been part of a larger strategy to remove himself from her life and from the reach of law enforcement. As investigators pieced together the timeline, it became clear that the underground room had been deliberately abandoned to mislead anyone who investigated too closely. The hidden space, the fake IDs, the maps, and the burned documents were not mistakes. They were distractions. They created the illusion of disappearance into danger, while in reality, he had already begun a new life elsewhere. The realization left Marissa numb and angry. Her home, which she had built with care and love, had been the stage for deception and control. Her husband had not disappeared into thin air. He had dissolved himself piece by piece, leaving only carefully curated evidence behind. For Marissa, the truth was worse than uncertainty. Even after the surveillance footage surfaced, the case remained officially unresolved, leaving Marissa suspended in a haze of unanswered questions. Authorities quietly acknowledged that he was likely alive, moving under a new identity, yet they had no concrete way to locate him. The man she had known, the one she had built a life with, no longer existed in any form she could recognize. The home, the memories, and even the marriage itself were revealed as carefully constructed layers of deception. Every corner of the house now carried the weight of hidden plans, and every object felt like a clue left behind to mislead and manipulate. Marissa could not stay in the house any longer. Its walls, once a symbol of her love and hard work, had become reminders of betrayal and secrets too deep to confront daily. She sold the property, eager to remove herself from the place where her husband's disappearance had been engineered. Moving away offered no comfort, only space to replay the discoveries over and over. The hidden basement, the forged IDs, the maps marking escape routes, all lingered in her mind, each a testament to a life she had never truly shared. Even as she tried to rebuild her life, the uncertainty remained. There was no closure, only the knowledge that her husband had planned every step meticulously, erasing his presence entirely while leaving her to face the aftermath. Marissa realized that the man she loved and married had never truly existed, at least not in the way she had understood him. His disappearance had been intentional, a complete vanishing act, executed with precision. The truth was chilling. He had not disappeared into thin air. He had dissolved himself from her world entirely, leaving a trail of carefully planted illusions, calculated distractions, and the haunting question of whether he would ever truly be found. For Marissa, the life she built was real, but the man she married had been a